Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we look into the hashtags, headlines, and who's committing war crimes. Let's get started. For many of my listeners who have been online for the last 2 years, you've probably seen many comments and posts about how Israel's committing war crimes. If I can be fair, this claim that people were using about how the Jews commit war crimes is not even a new thing. It's just that the latest conflict in Gaza gives people more of an excuse to say something. The reality is they've been claiming we've been genociding people for 70 plus years, despite the fact that those people who apparently are suffering a genocide have had their population increase tenfold over that period of time. Kind of the opposite of a genocide. But this doesn't really stop the people online from making up this claim. And so on this week's episode, I thought what I would do would be to debunk this claim. The claim that Israel is committing war crimes, and that the leaders of Israel are war criminals. Unfortunately, for Israel, there's a few little things that doesn't help their case. We've talked about it plenty of times on this podcast. Firstly is the ICJ case that was brought by South Africa claiming there was a genocide. A case that is technically still ongoing, but in the initial rulings, it was deemed that there is not a genocide, and that Israel could keep fighting, because it is a justified war. According to public dissent from an ICJ judge, the one who voted against any sanctions on Israel. She said, quote, "Unfortunately, the failure, reluctance, or inability of states to resolve political controversies, such as this one, through effective diplomacy or negotiation, may sometimes lead them to resort to a pretextual invocation of treaties like the Genocide Convention. In a desperate bid to force a case into the context of such a treaty in order to foster its judicial settlement." In non-legal speak, what she's suggesting in her dissent for any sanctions on Israel is the fact that this case was brought for the sole purpose of trying to stop the war through justice means rather than negotiation. Instead of having Israel and Hamas actually negotiate some sort of agreement, like for example what's going on right now, with them disarming and leaving, instead, Iran paid South Africa to bring this case simply to try to stop the war based on the fake claim that there is a genocide happening. And unfortunately, when this didn't work for Iran, paying South Africa to claim a genocide is happening, so please stop the war, they went to their next option, which was a Pakistani prosecutor at the ICC, who brought fake charges against Bibi Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister. Much like the ICJ case, this was an attempt to get the threat of international war crimes charges to force the Israelis to give up their war rather than do it through negotiation or defeat of Hamas. They wanted to scare Israeli leaders into giving up. This had nothing to do with actual war crimes. This prosecutor since resigned from the case after it came out that supposedly he not only didn't go to Israel or Gaza, despite being invited, in order to go see the supposed war crimes, or non-existent war crimes, and instead decided to charge when his legal assistant, a young woman, came forward with sexual assault charges against him, which he tried to bribe her to stay quiet or else it might ruin the case against Bibi Netanyahu. So he specifically brought the case against Bibi Netanyahu without any personal evidence in order to protect himself from a lawsuit and from being fired for sexually assaulting somebody. If you want more information on some of those cases, you can look back at some of our old episodes. One that we did in Season 3, Episode 130, International Criminal Court, the modern-day Dreyfus trial, could give you a little bit more information on those cases. This case, by the way, is under appeal considering the fact that Israel is not a signatory to the Rome Convention. So therefore, the ICC has literally no jurisdiction over Israel. And therefore, these charges are pretty much useless and meaningless, but hopefully they'll be thrown out considering the lack of evidence. So on the one hand, we have a group of people who have been desperate to try to claim Israel is committing war crimes, despite the fact that under every circumstance it seems that it's not true, and we've gone over that on our podcast. Meanwhile, we see no one talking about the actual war crimes that are being committed on a near daily basis because they're being committed by Hamas. And apparently, they don't count. Nobody cares. Even the ICC, who tried to bring charges against Bibi Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, they barely even considered charging the people of Gaza with the crimes that they committed, openly and on tape. The only person that the ICC charged, which is not a mistake, is Mohammed Deif. Mohammed Deif, a leader in Hamas, who at the time was already dead. They decided to bring charges against someone who was no longer alive. Apparently, nobody else in Hamas could be held responsible. You think it's an accident that they picked someone who is dead so they could appear like this is even-handed while literally doing nothing to stop Hamas? Of course not. There were at least a dozen other leaders in Hamas that could have easily been charged, considering their involvement in the October 7th attack. But I guess they really couldn't find any evidence to suggest they were involved. If only they had the evidence, surely they would have charged all the Hamas leaders with war crimes. And just so we're clear, it's not like the ICC and the ICJ and the media and the NGOs don't know what's going on in Gaza. They are incredibly aware of what happens in Gaza. They just ignore it. Like, for example, this week, when a statement was released from the NGO Doctors Without Borders, people who work in Gaza and have for many years, finally, after 20 years of working in Gaza, admitting that they've had to pull back from the Nasser hospital in Gaza because of, supposedly, quote, armed men in hospitals. They are now openly admitting to the things that we knew for many, many years, but they never admitted earlier. They've admitted openly now that Hamas uses hospitals for their men, for their weapons, to torture and interrogate people. These are common occurrences, and so Doctors Without Borders has said that they are going to take a step back from some of these hospitals and minimize the amount of people they have there. And the funny part is, this clearly isn't a new issue. They're only speaking about it now. Maybe there's less fear that Hamas will kill them for saying it. Although apparently not fearful enough to actually mention it's Hamas, they still leave it up to, quote, armed men that we don't really know who they are. So you're telling me that if Doctors Without Borders, among many other NGOs, know that Hamas is using hospitals, that the ICJ and the ICC don't know about it? They can't charge people for it? This action of using hospitals as military bases blatantly goes against the Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 19, Article 12, and Article 8 of the Rome Statute. According to Article 19, civilian hospitals organized to give care to the wounded and the sick may in no circumstances be an object of attack, but shall be at all times respected and protected. This protection shall not cease unless they are being used to commit outside of their humanitarian duties acts harmful to the enemy. Meaning, Hamas decided to read that statute, knowing it's a war crime, and purposely use their hospitals as bases, thinking that Israel can't hit them. It would be considered a war crime to online trolls. You hit a hospital. But unfortunately for them, the Fourth Geneva Convention allows you to hit those hospitals if they're being used for military purposes. The war crime is only if you hit a hospital that is acting as a hospital. It is not a war crime to hit a hospital acting as a military base, which, according to Doctors Without Borders, is exactly what's happening. Do we hear anything from the human rights groups, the ICJ, the ICC, about the illegal war crime of using hospitals as military bases? Of course not. Do we hear them complaining about Israel striking those hospitals because that is a war crime? Absolutely. The selective outrage is pretty funny when you look at it. Another classic war crime that they love to commit, and I don't think anyone really even doubts, is the way that Hamas fights without uniforms. You could make the claim that maybe they don't have uniforms, they're just a poor terrorist group, except they show proudly their uniforms when there's a ceasefire and they come out to kill their own people, and to put on little plays handing over dead bodies. They have very nice, sharp, clean uniforms. Apparently they can have uniforms, but just don't use them for fighting. Also, a war crime. Under the Geneva Convention, Article 37, you are not allowed to do what they call perfidy. Quote, it is prohibited to kill, injure, or capture an adversary by resorting to perfidy. And it lists specifically the feigning of a civilian or non-combatant status. It is against the Geneva Convention. It is illegal and a war crime. Also under the Geneva Convention, Article 44, quote, combatants are obliged to distinguish themselves from civilian population while they are engaging in an attack or in a military operation preparatory to an attack. What this means is you cannot dress like a civilian and do any kind of military action. Why? Because then it means that the other side cannot distinguish between civilians and fighters, which is incredibly dangerous for civilians. When you don't know if that person is a civilian or a fighter because they all look the same, you can technically think that that poor civilian is a fighter. It is why this law exists and was invented, to protect civilians. So for Hamas to purposefully use this tactic, this is literally using human shields. They have now made every single civilian in Gaza a possible target, because who knows how to distinguish between one civilian and one fighter when they look the exact same. And again, it's not exactly like the world doesn't know this. They post videos online of themselves shooting mortars in civilian clothes from civilian areas with children around. It's not like we don't see this all the time. Apparently, it's just really unfortunate that the international world, the ICC, the ICJ, none of these people seem to have TikTok where Hamas openly posts these videos of them doing this. A blatant war crime, especially in and around hospitals, which is a double war crime. I could go on and on with all of the things that the ICC and ICJ could have charged the Gazan Hamas members with, and yet they didn't. The last one, and to be honest, the most troubling, is the way that they use child soldiers. And again, this isn't secret. We know that they have recruited children under the age of 15. Under the Geneva Convention, Article 77, it states, quote, the parties to the conflict shall take all feasible measures in order that children who have not attained the age of 15 years do not take direct part in hostilities. Article 4 of the Geneva Convention says, quote, children who have not attained the age of 15 years shall neither be recruited in armed forces or groups, nor be allowed to take part in hostilities. This is also a war crime under the Protocol to the Convention of the Rights of Children and their Involvement in Armed Conflict, Article 1. Quote, parties shall take all feasible measures to ensure that members of their armed forces who have not attained the age of 18 do not take direct part in hostilities. Not to mention, under the Rome Statute at the International Criminal Court, Article 8, that says conscripting or enlisting children under the age of 15 into national armed forces or using them to participate actively in hostilities is a war crime. But do we see the international world caring about this? Seeing the videos of the child soldiers? Seeing the casualty lists of some children who were killed, called children of course, that are like 17, 16 years old, that are active combatants? Of course no one's talking about that. According to a JNS article, for decades Hamas has operated a military training camp where boys aged as low as 10 years old, up to 17, learn how to haul explosives, shoot weapons, and even kidnap Israelis. During this most recent war, Hamas's armed forces have absorbed 30,000 children soldiers. Hamas defends the abhorrent practice, calling it, quote, resistance. They even noted that using juvenile combatants offers 3 military advantages. They increase Hamas's firepower, constrain Israel's freedom to return fire on those children, and creates a false pretext to blame Israel when they're killed. Hamas doesn't even hide the fact that they're committing war crimes. They are proud of it, just like the way that they use the hospitals, blatantly and out in the open, hoping that no matter what happens, they are the winners. We use children, soldiers, to haul explosives, and then inevitably, when the IDF kills that active combatant, who happens to be a child, we get to add them to the list as a, quote, child who got killed by IDF. Look how many women and children are dying. The hypocrisy of the world who wants to lay charges or call Israel people who commit war crimes is absolutely insane when you see the fact that the other side willfully, openly talks about the fact that they commit war crimes. Knowing that the world is going to blame Israel for doing a war crime, such as hitting a hospital, the hospital that Hamas openly admits to using which was the war crime. Meanwhile, Israel is desperately trying to defend themselves in courts that are claiming that they're committing genocide despite all the evidence, with prosecutors who literally will not go on the ground to go and see that evidence before charging. The sad reality is that this really doesn't have anything to do with actual war crimes. If people cared, like NGOs, the international community, they would be outraged at seeing the use of child soldiers, the use of hospitals, using human shields because you dress like a civilian. If anyone else did this, this would be terrible. But for some reason, there's the Gaza loophole. When Palestinian Arabs do it, it's totally fine. We've talked about this on the podcast before, the way the world infantilizes the Palestinian Arabs, the people of Gaza, like it's not their fault. They don't know any better. They're just babies and children who can't make these decisions. When meanwhile, they go on camera or give interviews where they actively say, we are doing this on purpose. We are doing this because the more children who die because of us, the more that Israel will be sanctioned on the world stage. That if we sacrifice enough of our people, if our hospitals are blown up because we use them as military bases, the world doesn't care about that. They're going to blame Benjamin Netanyahu for that. It really is a win-win for them. And for their online trolls, they get to use the term war criminals, while obviously playing completely ignorant to the fact that the side that they support is doing the things that they claim that Israel's doing. In the end, the fact that people are using the term war crimes online, in the international world, is pretty much useless at this point, as we ignore blatant war crimes all over the world, but especially in Gaza, by Hamas, and only use it when we want to use it as a weapon against the Jewish state. Apparently, the only people who are responsible for war crimes in this world is Israel, while ironically, apparently there are no war crimes happening on the other side except for maybe one guy who was already dead, so don't worry about it. Let's not talk about it anymore. And just as a reminder, it's not like Hamas hides the fact that they are open to killing their own people for some type of goal, for resistance and whatnot. Take a listen to this CNN interview where one of the leaders of Hamas, who's currently safely in Doha, openly admits that he's willing to sacrifice all of the children in Gaza for his goals, and that every death is worth it.
But what gives you the right to decide that Palestinian women and children should be sacrificed on the altar of your resistance?
No, all the time we are sacrificing. We are fighting, not Hamas, Fatah and People's Front, Democratic Front.
But I am asking you about the civilian deaths in Gaza, and what gives you the right to decide it's a price worth paying. That child can die. It's okay. Because it's in order to fulfill our resistance.
As Hamas, we are fighting for the interests of the people. You know what is the benefit of October 7 now? Now, win the award now. If you look to the General Assembly yesterday, when about 194 people opened their eyes and looked to the atrocity, to brutality of Israel, and all of them, they condemned Israel. We waited for this moment for 77 years.
Sir, you were just saying that as a result of October 7th, you are seeing millions of people marching in the streets, you are seeing countries recognize Palestine as a state, you are seeing legitimacy for your people. And I am asking you whether the price that Palestinian people have paid so far was worth it.
I know the price is so high, but I must go again. What is the option?
It's worth it.
What is the option left to the Palestinians?
They don't even deny and will openly state on American television that they are okay with their people dying because look how it benefits us. And the world blames Israel for it rather than their own leadership, who are willfully sacrificing their people through their war crimes. The selective outrage by the international world, but especially people online, NGOs who want to demonize Israel while ignoring the crimes they themselves witness, is off the charts. It's hypocrisy at its best. If these groups really cared about human rights, they would be talking about the blatant war crimes that they are seeing on a day-to-day basis in Gaza. And the fact that they are not doing it proves that this is literally just about hashtags, headlines, and claiming that Israel does war crimes, despite all evidence to the contrary. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.